Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And welcome to episode 2 of...
We made it.
We made it all the way to episode 2 of Voices from the Crowd, a crooked path guide to Eastern Iowa theater.
Oof.
Yes, I know. Yes, it is a mouthful.
Of sadness.
It is a lot to listen
Yes.
to. It's an earful.
Please help us. Save us from ourselves. Please give us other options, please,
Yes,
for titles.
And at this time, we wish to thank everyone that listened to our first podcast about A Little Night Music.
Yes, thank you.
We had wonderful, wonderful, sweet comments and nice suggestions from people. We did not get really any suggestions for alternative titles, though. So please feel free to toss those out or suggest something else or tell us that you love this title and we will persist in it.
Maybe.
Special thanks to Marie von Baron who actually took us at our word and brought up the fact that the University of Iowa in 2003 did a production of A Little Night Music at Clapp Recital Hall, which we suspected was true.
It does seem sort of up their alley.
It does, but as Patrick mentioned last week, the university records only go back so far, and are really more focused on their current productions and what's coming up, and we'll be talking about one of those today. Yay. So again, thank you for all your kind comments and for listening. Today's podcast, again, episode 2, is entitled 4.5 Hamlets.
No,
4.5 Macbeths. Oh my goodness. I've got Hamlet on the brain.
Yes.
4.5 Macbeths. Yes. So this would ordinarily be the place where we talk about previous productions of Macbeth. But when we Google Iowa City or Iowa Macbeth, what we get are lots of information about current and upcoming productions, no fewer than 4 this fall in the corridor area, and then another production that is highly aligned or derivative of Macbeth. So we'll talk about those today.
And in an attempt to be fair to all of these wonderful productions, we're actually going to be talking a little later with the fabulous Miriam Gilbert, preeminent Shakespeare scholar.
Yes, who just wended her way back from the Great British Isles.
Yes, and is deigned to speak with us, and we're very, very excited.
And
so we'll be chatting with her about Macbeth, possibly a little about Hamlet, which is coming up in about a month, and really all things Shakespeare. So,
And she has some ideas on why there are so many productions of Macbeth, because as she points out, there are also many productions in Great Britain that are happening right now as well.
Yes, everyone's got Mackers on the brain.
Mackers on the brain.
I should point out, speaking of Mackers versus Macbeth, that we are speaking from our basement. We are not in a theater.
Our basement bunker.
Including our dog Detroit. Say hi, Detroit. He says hi. But yes, we are safe from theater. We are safely out of the theater and can say the name of the Scottish king. However, if you are listening in a theater, run now.
Yes.
Run now. Get out.
Or Google Blackadder undoing Macbeth.
Yes.
For what you have to do in order to make the curse go away.
More on that later.
Yes, exactly. Yes, there's much. There's a fair amount of superstition and tradition associated with the Scottish play.
Yes, and some interesting facts that perhaps contribute to the myth of the curse of Macbeth.
But first, let's talk a little bit about some upcoming productions.
Yes, please.
So that those that are interested in seeing this have a chance to compare and contrast as the fall goes on.
Yes.
So as we speak, we are right in the middle of the run of Willow Creek Theater's production of Macbeth.
Yay.
That is running. It started last weekend and is coming up this weekend, August 25th through 27th as well. Tickets are available at Willow Creek Theater with an RE.org. willowcreektheater.org. It is directed by Luke Brooks and is starring Alex McKay as Macbeth and Lindsay Brooks as Lady Macbeth. It also features a stellar supporting cast, including the first of the Rood family, and that's R-O-O-D, not R-U-D-E, R-O-O-D.
Rood, not Rudy.
Rood, not Rudy, and also Rude, not Rude.
Fair.
Yes. To be featured in productions dueling productions of Macbeth this fall.
I love it.
It also features Tara McGovern, who is playing Hecate, and on their fiddle, accompanying many of the scenes in a way that they have alluded to on their Facebook page, will be revealed to the audience as the play unfolds. So.
Yes.
Fascinating. Also, then later in the next production that is coming is September 9th through September 16th. So we do get a week off there. We have director K. Michael Moore's production at Mount Vernon Lisbon Community Theater, an outdoor production at the Memorial Park Stage, featuring fight choreography by K. Michael Moore as well. And help me again with that pronunciation of the actor playing Macbeth.
Oh, that's Jared DeRoy, I believe.
Jared DeRoy, thank you. And Lady Macbeth, Claire Boston. Those who attended the Flick at Riverside will have seen Claire in a very different role.
And Claire was also Rosalind in last year's production at Mount Vernon of As You Like It.
Yes.
Yes.
One of the witches is played by the other Rood family member, Braden Rood. And again, several theater luminaries coming together to put this production for 2 weekends in the middle of September.
It's a rude feud.
It's a Rood. Oh.
Thank you, I'm out.
Oh, my goodness, that's good.
Yes, I dropped the mic, but they're very expensive.
Yeah, well, and they're also like adhered to the...
Sure,
yes,
sure.
exactly,
So,
yes.
fair enough.
Tickets are available at mvlct.com, and that's MVLCT for Mount Vernon Lisbon Community Theater.com, September 7th through September 16th. The next production that we'll be seeing this fall is at University of Iowa Theater, in a production that goes up October 6th through October 14th, just 2 weekends in EC Maybe Theater, directed by Mary Mayo, who many of you may have seen in Riverside's production of The Roommate last spring.
Yeah.
She is also a professor of voice at University of Iowa. That production, literally as we are recording, is being cast. So more about the shape and nature of that production will be available as the month goes on. And then the final production of Macbeth this fall is at Cornell Theater, directed and devised by my very own husband.
Yes. Yes. Cornell College will be putting on a chamber production of Macbeth, probably just one performance during the day. So that's really sort of where I'm not sure I'd call it a full production. That is also yet to be cast and details to follow.
And remains somewhat in flux.
Yes, much like myself.
Yes, exactly. It's a beautiful flux,
Thanks.
though.
Thanks.
Yes.
It'll work out.
In recent years, there have been numerous productions of Macbeth across the corridor, far too many to mention. The most recent full production was in the Riverside Shakespeare in the Park in summer of 2017, starring... You, dear. Yes.
Me and Seren Snyder.
Yes, who's
and
getting married very soon.
And who's
We're
getting
very
married,
excited.
yes. And Tim Budd, yes.
Carrie Houchins
Witt, Kristen Newman, many local luminaries.
Yes, I remember the image that I take from it is Tim Budd appearing from as part of the scenery at one point.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Directed by Sean Lewis. And then I think for many local audiences, really the exposure to Macbeth in recent years has been in 2 filmed versions or versions on screen. The Denzel Washington, Frances McDormand Coen Brothers production in a film in 2021. And then the National Theatre Live's production, which was a recorded version at the National Theatre of Great Britain, starring Roy Kinnear and Anne-Marie Duff in 2018, which was broadcast at the Englert Theater and then also encored at the Englert Theater. Curiously, certainly Shakespeare has had an impact on a variety of other works, and there are several derivative works of Macbeth that directly reference Macbeth or use it as a starting point or are adaptations thereof. For example, Lady Macbeth and her pal Megan, our friend Megan Gogarty's monologue in spring of 2017, also at Riverside. Out Darn Spot by Tyler Anthony Smith, a Chicago artist who brought their production to Mirrorbox in summer of 2023. And in fall of 2005, playwright Adam Hahn produced a 20-minute adaptation of Macbeth over the course of 5 weeks at No Shame Theater, which is the guerrilla theater on Friday evenings at University of Iowa.
That is a lot of Scotsmen.
That is a lot of Scots folk, as it were. And speaking of Scots folk, there is we should talk about one other adaptation, which brings us to the half of 4.5 Macbeths.
Gotcha.
And that is Dreamwell Theater's Weird Sisters, WYRD Sisters, from October 12th to October 15th, literally overlapping with the second weekend of the University of Iowa's production of Macbeth. This is Terry Pratchett's story adapted by Stephen Briggs. Tickets are available at dreamwell.com. This is a fascinating adaptation and production source material. Terry Pratchett, of course, of Good Omens and the Discworld fame. Stephen Briggs was someone I didn't know as well, but he has actually adapted for the stage over 20 different titles by Terry Pratchett, and
by who?
By Terry Pratchett.
Sure.
Thank you. Who he has almost exclusively worked with Terry Pratchett in adapting his work for the theater,
and his sister Sterry.
His sister Sterry Pratchett.
Yes.
Terry Pratchett, Terry. Yes. And who helped in particular when Mr. Pratchett was experiencing a form of dementia at the end of his life, in making sure that his Discworld series continued, and has been the champion and repository of Mr. Pratchett's work. The Weird Sisters, of course, refer to the 3 witches in the world of Macbeth, and this play, directed by Josh Cezanne, will again be running at the James Theater, a space near and dear to our hearts.
Yes, indeed.
Tickets are available at thejamesic.com or at the dreamwell.com website.
All right. That is a lot of Mackers. Okay. All right. I am going to give you just the briefest. That's a lie. It's not brief. I'm going to give you a primer on the sort of the history of the play and the history of the actual Macbeth. I will go quickly. For my nerds in listening, my sources are the Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare by Isaac Asimov. If you do not own this, I highly suggest you get it. It's a fabulous read, particularly for the histories. You can get it on Amazon. Also, the book Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom, as well as the RSC website and Wikipedia. Full disclosure, this is about 10 hours of research. You could do 100 times that without breaking a sweat. This is very much an overview. It is in no way comprehensive. Please fact check me. Also, spoiler alerts ahead, or spoilers ahead. Just to let you know, I will be talking about some plot points in Macbeth. So if you don't want to know, don't listen, or listen after you see one of the productions.
And Macbeth has some mysterious elements to it as well.
Yes. All of which I'll be telling you. You're welcome. All right. Macbeth was written in 1606. Not all of Shakespeare's plays. We don't know the exact dates of writing for all of Shakespeare's plays, but this is one of them. It was written for a specific event. It is the shortest tragedy at 2,400 lines, just under 2,500 lines, as opposed to Hamlet, which is just over, which we'll be talking about in about a month. Hamlet is over 4,000. So it's a little over half, and it is the 6th shortest overall play. It was written to celebrate the visit of Denmark's King Christian IV to his brother-in-law, King James I. We got to talk about King James. Oh my goodness, what a piece of work. Okay, so King James, he is the first of the Stuart line. The Stuart line is the line that still is in... I'm going to put this in quotes, in power today. He was the very first of the Stuart lines. He was originally the king of. He is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. He was the original,
AKA Mary Stuart.
yes. Oh, hey.
Yes.
Originally king of Scotland. He was named as the successor to his aunt, Queen Elizabeth, on her deathbed. She did not have any children and was forced to make a choice. It was not it was not the choice she wanted, but it was the choice she had to make. So he is technically James the Sixth of Scotland and James the First. So he will frequently be referred to as James Sixth and First. You're welcome. He ruled England from 1603 till 1625. He was born Catholic, but almost certainly and raised for a certain amount of his life as Catholic, but was definitely Protestant, and this matters. He is curiously, for someone who's been dead for 400 years, he has a great deal of great bearing on our life today. He is best known to us as the reason that the King James Bible is in existence. The King James Bible was created in 1611. It was written as an accord to help mediate between Catholic and Protestant factions. The King James Bible is the first English translation of the Bible from either Latin or Greek, and he was responsible for that. He is also well known for the so-called gunpowder plot, which was the failed assassination attempt by Catholics to kill both him and blow up Parliament, led by a man named Robert Catesby, not Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was there, but it was led by Robert Catesby. Guy Fawkes was discovered basically holding the dynamite, and he was tortured to reveal names. And so when you hear remember the 5th of November, that's why.
So V for Vendetta Land also is
V
part
for Vendetta
of this.
Land, exactly. Fun fact, he was known for a number of personal bad habits. He was notoriously dirty. His tongue was too big for his mouth, and so constantly slobbered and drooled. And he was known to constantly fiddle with his codpiece. Yay! He is also a self-styled intellectual or self-proclaimed intellectual. He was famously called the wisest fool in Christendom. He was into a number of topics, but the big one that he was his passion was witchcraft. He wrote an entire book on witchcraft called Demonology, and personally oversaw the torture and execution of many witches. Curiously, witches at this time.
Witches in quotes, yes.
Yeah, well, curiously, witches at this time were exactly what you think, which are old, single, and perhaps less attractive. And yeah, right?
That was my horrified face there.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, it's like high school all over again.
Oh, dear. There were so few executions at my high school, but
well, I went to school in Arizona, so there
all
were
right.
more. Anyway,
mileage may vary.
Yes. Anyway, this is when Shakespeare comes in, and this is when Macbeth comes in. So the play was written, as I said, to honor this visit of this King of Denmark. Macbeth and Shakespeare chose Macbeth both for its interest and its in subject matter being witchcraft and demonology, which he knew the king was into, and because it honors James's Scottish roots very much so. The amount of politics that go, the needle that Shakespeare threads when writing this play is unbelievable. So, there is also some degree of truth to, truth to the idea that at the time there were still a lot of non-Christian or pre-Christian beliefs in the UK and in Ireland. The Romans invaded more than 1,000 years prior and brought Christianity to the English Isles, then left when the Roman Empire crumbled, but they left their beliefs. And over time, in isolation, those formed Celtic Christianity in Ireland, which was its own sort of funky sect of Catholicism.
Hybridized Catholicism.
Yes. It was officially, in quotes, stamped out of Ireland in an accord in 664, but it really took hold in Scotland. So we have Protestant beliefs, we have Roman Catholic beliefs, we have old Celtic Catholic beliefs, and we have pagan beliefs going on all at the same time. So there is some reason to think this play would be a hit. Shakespeare's source was the Holinshed Chronicles. This was a book written in 1577 by a number of people, but largely by a man named Raphael Holinshed. It is a 3-volume comprehensive history. Each book covers England, Scotland, and Ireland. It was the source for all of Shakespeare's histories, as well as King Lear and Cymbeline. It was also used by Christopher Marlowe and Spenser and the poet George Daniel. Having said that, the actual history of Macbeth bears little resemblance to the play. Here's the actual
in a Shakespeare play. Deviations from factual source material.
The heck you say? So the actual Scotland was the actual Macbeth ruled from the year 1040 to the year 1057. Scotland was very new at the time. It was formed around the year 840 AD, mostly in order to help resist Viking marauders that kept coming down from the Isles. The actual Macbeth was considered a strong and fair king. As opposed to the king he really did kill, the actual Macbeth really did kill the King Duncan, but Duncan was considered a weak and ineffectual king. Macbeth also almost certainly killed Duncan in battle. Holinshed refers to Macbeth. Macbeth slew Duncan, which is always a reference to battle as opposed to Macbeth murdered Duncan. And then real Macbeth ruled peacefully for 10 years, and it's only in the last 7 years of his life that he grows paranoid and starts to worry about someone taking the throne the way he took it. And it is the last 7 of those years that Shakespeare takes and uses as the focus of his play, and he compresses time a great deal. Macbeth and Duncan are actually related. They are cousins. Not much reference is made to it in the play, but it is there. Duncan says, "Oh, valiant cousin." Macbeth says refers to his kinsman and his subjects. So they are related. At the top of the play, mention is made of a at the top of the play, we're in the middle of we're in the end of a battle, which is a rebellion led by both a character and a person named Macdonald, who was the Thane of Cawdor, which is a real place. Thane is sort of the Scottish version of an earl.
I was always confused by that. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Cawdor was in North Scotland. What would frequently happen is the Thanes in northern Scotland would the Vikings would attack, and rather than try to resist them, they would join forces with the Vikings and try to back that horse. In this particular case, Macdonald backed the wrong horse. But the real Duncan almost certainly allowed this to happen. One of the ways he was a bad king. So that's real Macbeth. Now we get into play Macbeth and the characters in the play. Again, let's start with King Duncan. He is an actual ancestor of James I. Because of that, and this is where we started to get into politics, because of this, he cannot be portrayed as weak. Because it is part of the royal line of succession. The royal line must be intact. So he is portrayed in the play as strong and just and wise and trusting of Macbeth. The witches featured in the play, they are featured in Holinshed Chronicles. Curiously, there is the history features supernatural acts, but they are portrayed much more as fairies. What we would consider sort of sprites or fairies, and it's Shakespeare who took them and turned them into this sort of typical idea of these 3 crones, because they were in vogue at the time. These must be witches. The actual Lady Macbeth was descended from royalty and had, curiously, a bigger claim to the throne than Macbeth did. Her real name was Gruach, which makes me feel like Macbeth was originally written in Klingon, but no.
No one appreciates it till you read it in the original Klingon.
It's so true. Yes. There was a minor lord named Donwald, an actual person. He murdered King Duff and was encouraged by his wife. This is in Holinshed Chronicles.
Interesting.
And it basically, Shakespeare took this much smaller, insignificant story and applied it to the actual story of Macbeth. So yeah, none of this play is real, or none of this play is true.
So
And then
it's kind of like what we learned about Richard III in the Lost King movie, and then subsequent scholarship about that the surviving line rewrites the history.
yeah, the history is always written by the victors.
There we
So,
go.
yeah. So here, and then we get to Banquo. Banquo is my favorite sort of fun story. In the play, he's frankly, he's a little vanilla. He's a good guy. He is portrayed as steadfast and honest, and is spoiler alert, killed by Macbeth for knowing too much. The actual Banquo, this is amazing. The actual Banquo probably almost certainly never existed. However, he is in the Holinshed Chronicles. Basically, Banquo was invented by history to clean up the Stuart line of kings, because if as James looks back through his ancestors and through his heritage, there is some question here about exactly who his grandparentage and great grandparentage, who they are. It is very likely that the king's steward is his ancestor and not the king. And the king's steward was a dun foreigner. And right.
We can't have none of that.
Well, we can't have none of that. But it's interesting because it's actually, we joke about it, and I think it's difficult for Americans to understand this. But the fact of the matter is this mattered, because if kings are supposed to be part of the royal line, the succession of kings ordained by God, then if there is question about that, then it's not just vanity. Then it could lead to the destabilization of the entire country.
The institution itself.
Yes, because if this person isn't actually descended from the line of kings, then who is? And then all of a sudden, every brother, every cousin starts to look up and says, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I better go raise an army. Also, the Stuart line is very, very new. Prior to the Stuart line, Henry VII put an end to the war, the so-called Wars of the Roses between the Yorks and the Lancasters, when he killed Richard III in 1485. Mm-hmm. From there, he created the Tudor line, and that lasted through Henry VII, Henry VII, Henry VIII, and Queen Elizabeth, and then died with her. So then we bring in the Stuart.
Go back to the Stuarts.
So it matters. But again, it totally political move. And so again, Shakespeare, threading that needle, creates this character that King James can look to and say, that's my ancestor. Look at that guy. Amazing. I love it. I also want to talk just a little bit about the Porter. The Porter just has one scene in the play, the scene immediately following the death of King Duncan, the murder of King Duncan, and he's portrayed as drunk, and Macduff is knocking at the door, and the Porter thinks it's in his head, and all of a sudden he's the Porter of Hellgate, and he's living in a hellmouth. Except, and this is when we get into the hidden circumstances of Shakespeare, and this is going to be true of every play he wrote, that in this world, and not even necessarily the world of the play, but in the world that Shakespeare was writing, this Elizabethan world, God is very much real, God is very much everywhere, God is very much judging you, and God is angry. Hellmouths are real. There really are entrances to hell. And this is what the Porter is supposedly guarding. And then we have something called the Elizabethan chain of being. This is amazing. So this is basically a very rigid caste system that happened during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, hence the name. It starts with there is God in his throne, then Jesus Christ, his son. But then we go down through the order of angels, the cherubim and seraphim, the regular angels, lesser angels, down, through to, then we get into the human realm, starting with the King of England or the Queen of England, then the royal family, then all men with titles down through the peasantry, so on and so forth. But then it keeps going. This gets very Dungeons and Dragons. Then we get down to the animals, and then the animals in order start with animals that are
Noble.
well, yes, basically, and by noble, of use to humans. So
Yes.
we start with
Horses.
livestock, horses and cows and sheep,
Yes.
and then dogs and cats. And it goes all the way down through the smallest creature that could be observed at that time, which I think were large paramecia. Where it gets interesting is if you broke the chain of being, if you tried to leap a cast up, it threw the world into chaos. And it was more than it was considered more than just wrong. It was considered taboo, and sort of the only thing that we have close to it is how we would feel about something like incest. That it's more than just illegal. It feels wrong to us. It feels morally wrong.
It is offensive.
It is offensive. It is taboo. Yeah. So there's, for example, there's this wonderful scene. It's frequently cut in Macbeth for time because it's with two characters that only appear in one. It's the character of literally old man and someone named Ross, Rosse, the night after the murder of King Duncan, and they're just talking about the weird things that are happening the night after Duncan's killed. They can't tell the difference between night and day. It should be daytime, but it seems night. Owls eat hawks, horses eat each other. So to our ears, we think, oh gosh, that sounds awful. That's weird and creepy. But to Elizabethan ears, they're saying, well, of course that's happening. You broke the chain of being. Macbeth tried to jump up. And of course the world's in chaos. You get what you deserve. Anytime ghosts appear in plays, that's because the chain of being is broken.
It's broken.
Yeah, it's and again, it is a hidden. It's not specific. It's specifically written in a Shakespeare play that I know of. So it's sort of a hidden circumstance. But if you know it, you go, oh, that's what that is.
But it's a context that the audience would have known.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And now you know it. There are a couple of themes running throughout Macbeth that are worth mentioning. We are constantly dealing with time in this play. People who do not have enough time to do what they need to do, and that they are constantly running out of it. So time is portrayed as this voracious feeder of humans. And this comes about time and again throughout the play. You mentioned before the Weird Sisters. We hear Weird Sisters and we think W-E-I-R-D, like Eerie. But the fact of the matter is, it is much closer to Weird, W-Y-R-D, which means fate. And if you listen to what they say, they really do echo the three fates of mythology, also or in Norse mythology, the Norns. Mm-hmm. There really is what was, what is, and what will be. So the first time Macbeth runs into the witches, they say, "Hail Thane of Glamis," which he already is. "Hail Thane of Cawdor," which he's about to become, and then "Hail King he who shall be king hereafter, what will be," which echoes Greek mythology.
Yes. And for those of you that read Percy Jackson and the New Olympians, you are also familiar with those stories.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I'm off topic. Okay, I'm back. We seem to, and I think this maybe answers a bit of the question of why there's so many Macbeths going on. Of the three major tragedies, Macbeth, Hamlet, and Lear, we seem to identify more with Macbeth than we do the other two. Hamlet is too intellectually remote, and Lear is too gonzo out there. But we all have secrets. We all have ambition. We all have this dark part of us. And Macbeth rather, just lets it in until it consumes him. It is considered, and this is from the Harold Bloom, which I think is interesting. It's considered the first expressionist play. Expressionism is the use of distortion. strong distortion to deliver strong feelings or ideas. And that's certainly true in Macbeth. Again, we never know if it's day or night. We never know where we are or when we are. So that expressionism is used throughout the play. Yeah. And that's it. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, as we mentioned earlier, the origin of the curse. So the folklore goes that actual witches put a curse on the original production when Shakespeare used real incantations. This is nonsense. It is apocryphal, but it's fun. That said, many things supposedly went wrong in the first production. Lady Macbeth, the actor playing Lady Macbeth died suddenly during the first production, and Shakespeare himself had to step in for the role. And the rumor is the actor playing King Duncan was actually stabbed when a fake knife was replaced with a real one, which sounds great, except Duncan is murdered off stage. So that likely did not happen. Things that did happen, the Astor Place riots of 1849. In New York City, there were dueling productions of Macbeth. The American Macbeth, Edward Forrest, and the English Macbeth, William Charles Macready. And their rivalry was such that it actually spurred a riot. 20 people were killed and 100 people were injured, which on the one hand sounds absolutely awful. On the other hand, oh my gosh, people cared so much about theater.
They got so excited.
I know. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. That's
it's
very
like
wrong.
competing productions of The Wild Party going after each other.
That is a deep track, my friend.
Cut.
That is a deep
track.
Yes. A stage wait narrowly missed Laurence Olivier in 1937. It nearly killed him. And then there's this other idea that when companies, and I hope this isn't true, when companies do Macbeth, it's a sign that the company is actually in trouble because Macbeth is relatively cheap to produce, and it always brings in money. So if you see a company
it's a
doing
crowd pleaser.
Right. If you see a company doing Macbeth, chances are they're in trouble. I don't think that's true. I hope it's not true. Officially, and this is from the RSC website, I don't think they'd lie, to break the curse, you immediately exit the theater, you turn around, I hope you're writing this down, you exit the theater, you turn around 3 times, you spit, you curse, and you ask to be let back in.
Oh, that last one is the one people forget.
Yes. That is how you break the spell. And that's all I got.
Bravo.
Well, this was fun to do. Some of these things I already knew. So much of it I didn't. I have done 3 different productions of Macbeth, and it makes me sad for the productions I've done, because some of those things I should have known. But there you go. All right.
Well, that was... we're just going to go from high to high, because that was an informative primer based on your research, and now we're going to actually speak with a real live expert. My goodness. So digest away, because course number 2 is about to come. We are interviewing Miriam Gilbert, Shakespeare expert, on her thoughts on Macbeth and contemporary corollaries, as she will undoubtedly reveal for all of us. Patrick, thank you for putting that together. That was remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, if you're still listening.
Yes, and hang in just a moment. We'll begin our discussion with Miriam Gilbert.
Hi, everyone. We are here with Miriam Gilbert, preeminent scholar, author, teacher, writer, dramaturg, director, occasional actor. Well, once upon a time, occasional actor, and all around Iowa City legend. Hello, Miriam. Welcome.
Hello, Patrick.
It's so
and
nice,
Chris.
It's so nice to see you again. It's
good to be with you.
It's been a few years. You have just returned from the UK, as is your summer ritual for 40 years.
For 40 years.
Yes.
40 years ago in '83, I bought a house in Stratford-upon-Avon.
Oh.
I blush to say it does not have a thatched roof. And as we often say, it's so hard to find a good thatcher these days.
Oh, my goodness.
My goodness.
But it is a late 19th century townhouse. And it's 5 minutes from the train station, but more importantly, it's only 10 minutes from the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. And I tend to say, I live in Stratford, and we've got a really good local theater company.
Yeah, the community theater there is
Absolutely.
is some next level.
Yes.
How did you get here? We know you were born in Alabama. Yes.
I was born in Alabama, but grew up mostly in Cincinnati, where my father moved to teach chemical engineering. He'd worked for TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, as a chemical engineer, and then he thought that teaching looked like more fun. And so we moved to Cincinnati. Mother had been teaching in Alabama, but she got a different job. I'm the third PhD and the third university teacher in my family, so nothing unusual there. And my parents loved music and theater. Daddy did a lot in amateur theater. I was allowed to cue him as he learned his roles, and I was allowed, when only 6 and 7, to attend the performances as long as I promised not to speak the lines along with everybody else, because by then I knew them.
Fair enough. Yes.
And so I grew up in Cincinnati, which had a good repertory theater, Playhouse in the Park, which at the time when I was growing up was just the caretaker's shed, but a few years later opened a beautiful modern theater.
Wow.
And that helped. But the real way in which I got to be what I've done now is 1961-62. My father had a sabbatical, which he waited to take until I'd finished my senior year in high school. Yes, indeed.
Very convenient. Well done.
We went to England. I was at the University of Manchester. They said, well, you're only going to be here for a year, so you're not reading for a degree. You are an occasional student in arts, which I felt was sort of a put down.
Yes.
And they said, so you can take anything you want. Obviously, it didn't matter, right? So I took French and I took modern Hebrew. I was thinking I might go in that direction. I took philosophy. And then I saw there was a full-year Shakespeare course. And I said, oh, I want that. Oh, no, they said. That's for third-year students. You're a first-year student. And Smarty Pants said, you said I could take anything I wanted. So I took a full-year Shakespeare course, 3 different lecturers, tragedies, histories, tragedies, comedies. The comedies lecturer was a very well-known scholar, Frank Kermode. And it was my first time of being at university, of going into a university library, of going, into the stacks, picking books off the shelves, reading everything, believing everything, not worrying about contradictions.
Sure.
And of course, I also got involved with the university drama group. We did a production of Pinter's The Birthday Party, which in 1961 was still a pretty new play. Yeah. We were selected to take it to the National Union of Students Drama Festival in Bristol. And that is where Pinter gave the talk that is now reprinted everywhere called Writing for the Theater, in which he talks about his stuff. So I was totally involved in theater, both contemporary and otherwise, but it was also my first trip to Stratford. Christopher Plummer and Eric Porter in Richard III.
Oh, my goodness.
And
Spoiled for choice.
I'm waiting backstage, at the stage door to get Plummer's autograph. Huge crush. And out of the corner of my eye, I see that my father is talking to some old lady. And afterwards, I say, who was that? He was chatting up the actor playing Queen Margaret, Dame Edith Evans. I completely missed her. Totally. So it was that year of studying Shakespeare, of seeing plays, doing plays, going over to Leeds to see plays. An actor named Ronald Pickup, who is, was a major actor. I saw him when he was still an undergraduate at Leeds. I saw Martin Jenkins, who was very active in the Liverpool Everyman, where Terry Hands was when he was an undergraduate actor. So I saw Oliver. I saw all kinds of plays.
Oh my goodness.
And it just, I never recovered.
No.
I think that's the simple thing. I fell in love with Shakespeare and with England. And so now I have a house in England, in Shakespeare's hometown. And I taught Shakespeare for 44 years at the university.
Well, when you go in full.
Yeah. Talk about being a fan and overdoing it, right?
Do you think it was just the entire year in Manchester and the being completely immersed in it, or can you pinpoint a specific play or teacher or performance where you said that is for me?
I think it was the whole year, to be honest, and the excitement of it, and just absolutely falling for it. I will say that the professor Robin Skelton, who taught the history plays, who was also better known as a poet, was very, very exciting. And I think that I've always had a special spot in my heart for the histories. And when I was a senior at Brandeis, which is where I went after this, I did do an honors paper on the history plays. And so I suspect that goes back to that. And not everybody goes for the history plays right away. But to me, they were so exciting because he made them so exciting.
Sure.
And you really got the sense that they're about people and their interactions. And I guess the other thing that would fit with that is I saw a production of Julius Caesar in Manchester at the Library Theater. And, Julius Caesar is that high school play that everybody teaches.
That's what I read.
Which I think gets taught because you don't have to deal with sex, but teachers can show off stuff about ancient Rome. But this was one of those things where the four major characters, Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, and Mark Antony, were all sort of evenly cast. And it was the first time that it occurred to me that this was a play about a group of people. And that, I think, probably went through. So those are the moments. But really, it was just the excitement of that whole year. And as I say, I didn't recover.
And we are very grateful for that. Sometimes when you crack wide open, there's nowhere to go except deeper.
And when I went to Brandeis, I spent a lot of time working for the theater department. I did lighting, I did sound, I did stage management. I didn't try to go on stage. In England, of course, I couldn't go on stage because they sounded so funny,
Sure.
Absolutely. But so I just stayed with that, which meant that I was spending every single night down at the theater watching rehearsals. And after a while, there's only so many notes you can take about lighting and sound. So you start essentially becoming a director and watching, and also recognizing the value of rehearsal, which I don't need to tell you guys about, but that a rehearsal is when you try out things and you discover. And it's not repetition, although that's the French word, répétition, but you're trying, you're experimenting. And so I think that was my second real education, was all that time that I spent watching rehearsals of student performances.
You had the advantage of having the scholarly aspects of the work you were working on, and then watching them come into fruition in life as they perhaps were intended to be.
Well, exactly. And I don't know that I worked on a Shakespeare play. The one I remember most because of the timing was Hedda Gabler, and we were supposed to open it on November 22nd, 1963. And
got upstaged.
And I think we realized that there was no way that Hedda was going to pick up that gun. No way.
Fair enough.
I spent the afternoon at the theater calling all the residence halls and everything and saying, no, we will not have a performance. I don't think we had a performance all weekend. I mean, how could you?
No.
Yeah.
But I remember what it was like to be there and to have sort of the world of the theater and the awful reality of the assassination somehow come into contact with each other.
Yeah.
So after Brandeis, Indiana, MA, PhD in Indiana?
MA and PhD. And again, I wasn't, although I was in love with Shakespeare and Shakespeare's plays, I didn't think I could get a job teaching Shakespeare. I mean, everybody does Shakespeare, right? So I was going to be a medievalist, unhampered by the fact that I had no German. I had Latin, I had French, I didn't have German, but I thought, well, maybe I can fake it. And then I think it was somewhere halfway through my second year, I got an idea about Shakespeare's plays and about women in the plays and how do women, I didn't use this word, I was not a feminist kind of person, but agency. That is, how do women cope? And my idea was that in the comedies, at least, they coped by either not being quiet and submissive. In other words, they became shrews And that's how they express themselves. So you've got Adriana in Comedy of Errors, and of course Catherine in Shrew, and you've got Beatrice, and then you've got Paulina in The Winter's Tale, very late. Or, even more significantly, they disguise themselves as men. And they go out into the world and they can do things that they could not do otherwise. They can chase after the guys that they're trying to get. Portia can walk into a courtroom in Venice. How it is that nobody, no man in Venice has figured out how to deal with Shylock.
Interesting.
Nobody.
Of course.
But a woman walks in, disguised as a man, armed indeed with an opinion from her kinsman, Dr. Bellario. She can do it. She's the outsider. And I think there's something about being that outsider who doesn't play by the same rules, who doesn't have all the same prejudices, right? And then, of course, you've got Rosalind in As You Like It. You've got Viola. You've got Helena briefly in All's Well, Perdita, and Imogen, of course, in Cymbeline is wonderful. So you've got all these disguised girls. So I came up with this idea because a friend of mine was in a Shakespeare class, and I said, "Oh, I just had this idea. What do you think? Do you want that for a term paper?" And I came back after break. I said, "Did you write that term paper?" And she said, "No, I found something else." I said, "Oh. Well, looks like there's a deadline for an NEH fellowship. I think I'll just see what happens with this." So I wrote a proposal for a fellowship, and I got it, and I turned into a Shakespearean again.
What was your dissertation on?
The Shrew and the Disguised Girl in Shakespeare's comedies.
There we go.
Yes.
Oh, that's
I mean, there it was.
Uh,
Most of which are in the first folio, which is, we're celebrating the 400th anniversary. And except for Merchant and Much Ado, all of the plays that I wrote on were first folio plays. I had no idea, but that came in very handy this spring when I had to do a lecture about celebrating the first folio. I went back and rewrote my dissertation, condensed it a bit.
We won't tell.
That's the secret of academia,
Isn't it? Plagiarizing from oneself, right?
I mean, steal from the best.
Yeah.
And then from there, you went from Indiana to
here. So I've had one job.
Wow.
Iowa needed somebody to teach Shakespeare. They had some fine people. Baldwin Maxwell, who had chaired the department and who was a textual scholar, was a Shakespearean. He, of course, had retired. John Huntley was here. Kurt Zemansky occasionally taught Shakespeare. Sven Armans. But they had tried to get somebody who was primarily just a Shakespeare person. And they had failed. They got a wonderful guy, Ned Partridge from Tulane, and his wife didn't like Iowa City. So after a year, he went back to Tulane. And they hired a young guy from Chicago, Bill Hayashi, and his sister didn't like Iowa City. So he was here. So I think I just lucked out that they were looking for somebody to teach Shakespeare, and I got that job. So I taught here for 44 years.
It does sadly seem of another era to have a resident Shakespearean scholar.
Yeah.
Makes me sad. I wish that was still part of our world.
Well, it just, although at Iowa, I don't think Shakespeare was a required course, but it was required that you had at least 3 courses in literature before 1800, so Shakespeare was obvious. And the other thing is, I'm not sure about this, but the education folks in secondary ed, I think there was a requirement, may still be there, that if you were going to teach English in secondary level, you did have to have a Shakespeare course.
I hope so.
Wow.
I hope
So
that's the case.
And also, back in the day, we cross-listed courses between English and theater. So this is what budget stuff has done to us. Now, everybody is worried, does this count for my department? But I could teach that course, and it counted as an English course. It counted as a theater course.
Well, and it's interesting. It's worth pointing out, I think, that you did not teach in the theater department. You taught in English.
That's right.
Department.
But that is because, as you probably know, English departments know who their cash cow is. And I don't know any English department that doesn't try to grab the Shakespeare course for themselves.
Fair enough.
To be honest, because they know it will sell. I mean, it always does. And what happened with me is that I got involved in having students perform scenes in class. And that's something I learned at Iowa. Because in my very first semester, I didn't teach Shakespeare. I taught a team. I was in a team taught course. It met every day for 2 hours a day. It was worth 12 credits, so it was 4 courses rolled into one. It was called the English semester, and we read everything from Chaucer up to 1900. And we read 9 plays, and we divided the class into 3 acting groups, and every acting group had to present a scene from that play. And so they did 3 scenes during the semester. I can tell you that when the Antony and Cleopatra group decided that they wanted to do the drinking scene on Pompey's yacht, a little method acting went on, and they went up to the airliner over lunchtime, and it was an uninhibited performance that afternoon, let me tell you. But they knew that I had this background in rehearsing and stuff like that. So I got to choose all the plays, and I worked with all the acting groups. And then I realized, well, I could just import that into the Shakespeare class. Yeah. So theater students liked the way I taught Shakespeare because they knew that at least once in the semester, they'd get up and perform.
I teach a lot of acting for non-majors, and
yes.
I am constantly surprised with the frankness and the honesty that you get from someone who, quote, doesn't do this. Because they don't do it, I think oftentimes they just feel free.
Absolutely. Well, I still remember the group that was doing the scene from Coriolanus where you've got all the citizens, and they decided that they should be sort of like Iowa farmers in overalls and stuff confronting Coriolanus. Or I'm not even sure this was a Shakespeare class. I think this was a Gen Ed Lit section. And we were reading Midsummer Night's Dream. And, of course, one of the obvious things to do is the play within a play. And I always had students memorize their lines because that way you own them. Well, the poor kid who was playing Moonshine just hadn't really been able to do it. And I said, okay, just go ahead, use your book. So it turned into this wonderful thing where Moonshine was trying to hold on to the lantern, the dog, and the script of the play all at the same time. And it just became yet another thing that Moonshine
You might have kept it in.
could not cope with. It was wonderful.
Let's steal that. We should
I know,
use that.
that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, somebody in that group is not going to be able to learn the lines.
Right.
Why not Moonshine?
Why not? Why not?
And
Yes.
because Moonshine is the one that has all the props.
Yeah, and that's true to the circumstance of that moment.
Right.
Yes.
That he might still have the side. It was great. The other thing is that it was not an option. In other words, you couldn't opt out of this. I would say to them, everybody does this. And somewhere quite early on, I learned this wonderful concept called spontaneous applause. And I would announce to the class that at the end of every performance, we would erupt in spontaneous applause. And that to make sure that we did it at the right time, and I would have seen rehearsals, so I knew, I said, and I will lead the spontaneous applause.
Excellent.
And so that took away that awful, oh my gosh, what if they don't like it thing.
I'd heard a previous interview with you talking about the importance of students owning the text.
Yes.
And I think that is both true of the beginner and the professional. And,
Right.
and that it is oftentimes lost on us, the ability to just to not be afraid of it.
Well, that's it. And once you have made that effort, I think you're less afraid. And in a way, that was always the moment that I waited for in the Shakespeare class, when you could tell that people were no longer afraid of the text. Not just in performance, but, I would start with comedies generally, and then shift into history plays. And I do remember the moment I was teaching Richard II, which is one of my all-time favorite plays. I'll tell you about that, where Richard is talking about, I live with bread like you, feel want, need friends, subjected thus, how can you say to me, I am a king? This is when he comes back from Ireland and is facing defeat. And I still remember a student saying, "That sounds like Shylock. Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands," etc. And I had not ever put those speeches together. At that moment, that kid doesn't really need me anymore, right?
Yeah.
This is somebody who is hearing what Shakespeare is doing. And so it's like the click.
Yeah.
And it would happen at different times for different people. But my whole aim was always to get students to the point where they did not need me,
Yeah.
where they could read the plays and ask the questions and come up with their interpretations themselves. And of course, performance was a way to show us those interpretations.
We're in a moment now where both the professional and the academic world is questioning the validity of teaching Shakespeare and what it I know and
Miriam crawls under the table.
Yes, listener. There's a look of shock and horror. Yes.
so my question is,
Are we talking about Florida?
we are talking about everywhere.
About everywhere. But the
because
Florida
because
thing
it's
really
everywhere
scared
from
me.
Florida to Ashland Shakespeare Festival, rewriting plays to make them easier, and or quote more accessible.
Are they really?
They are.
Because I went to Ashland for years. Thank goodness. I don't have to go there now.
I'm not sure that is still happening. I think that
Well,
was an experiment that was not well received.
And in fairness, it arose from perhaps a more noble cause, which was to hire contemporary,
That's right.
successful playwrights
To
to
do a-
reimagine the Shakespeare
That's
plays
what I
as
thought they were
companions
doing.
to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It got put in the press as they were going to write substitutions.
Okay.
And I think that was not necessarily the intention of Ashland, but it certainly got presented that way. And some people embraced the
Yes.
substitution idea, and
Right.
that was the alarm.
Well, and there are moments where you say, how many times, and I speak as a Jew myself, how many times are you going to hear the word Jew in The Merchant of Venice? Well, you're going to hear Jew or Jewish 69 times, I can tell you. I've written on that play. But I have seen productions which start cutting it. And you can't do that.
No.
Really, and I'm not saying Shakespeare was anti-Semitic. I don't think he was. But I think that play makes everyone very, very uncomfortable. And I think it's meant to. And I think you've got to leave in, "Art thou contented, Jew?"
Yes.
Because otherwise, Portia is pretending that she is neutral, which is the merchant here and which the Jew. I don't think she is.
No.
Right.
Because in her back hip pocket, she's got the stuff about the blood. She's leading him on, I think. I mean, she hopes he might come to the right thing. What about charity and so forth? But she knows she can trap him.
That
I think
Merchant of Venice is my favorite.
Is it?
It is, and my favorite is because it is my favorite because no one gets away clean, and it asks you the question, what do you do with the love you have for these people? Because you meet all these wonderful, amazing, funny, sexy, rich, clever people.
Prejudiced as hell.
All
Yes.
prejudiced.
Right.
So what do you do with the relationship that you have developed with these people over the course of the play?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why
It's so dirty. I love
But
it.
it's a great play to teach, because if you are trying to get students not to settle for a quick answer, to get away from the labels, you can destabilize almost any reaction in that play half a line later. And again, Shylock's big speech is a great example of this. Hath not a Jew eyes? Yes, yes, yes. And shall we not revenge? And oh my gosh, suddenly you are completely trapped because you've been nodding agreement with him. Yes, you're a human being like us and so forth. Revenge. And suddenly you are trapped in his world and in his pain and in his anger. And I have never had a semester where I don't teach that play in a Shakespeare class, because it makes students have to read so carefully and have to be willing to revise their thoughts moment by moment. which is where theater is in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. When the ring is returned, when they at the end, and everyone realizes, oh, now we have to live with what we've done, and now we have to live with the failures of the people we love.
Yes.
As Jessica looks at Lorenzo and
Oh my
what
gosh,
have I
yes.
done? But this is the life I've chosen, and it's so
Right.
good.
Well, have you ever seen the Olivier production?
I have not.
Oh, well, at the end of that, this was directed by Jonathan Miller. This was about 1970, and Olivier played Shylock, complete with a fair amount of prosthesis, as he tended to do, and so forth. But he modeled his Shylock on Rothschild. It's a late 19th century thing. You want the most famous merchant banker of the 19th century? It's Rothschild. And he and Antonio were dressed exactly alike. Black sort of cutaway striped trousers. So when Portia says which is the merchant here and which the Jew, it's a fair question because these guys, Anthony Nichols, Olivier, they look very much alike, they're dressed the same, and so forth. And at the end of that production, when Jessica and Lorenzo are there, everybody goes into the house. Antonio is the last one, and he holds out his hand to Jessica. She moves away, as if realizing what's happened, and you hear the Kaddish, which is the prayer that is said in memory of the dead, being chanted. And you are face to face, or your ears, with the reason she has that inheritance is because Shylock is dead.
Yeah. Oh.
And you can't get away from it. And it just, it's a brilliant, brilliant ending. And Lorenzo tries to reach out his arm to her. She moves away from him too. In other words, she is lost.
Yeah.
But I've also seen productions that end up with Portia sitting on the sofa in between Antonio and Bassanio. And the question is, and how many people are there now in this marriage?
Yes.
Right? Because Antonio says, I dare be bound again, my soul upon the forfeit, that your Lord will never more break faith advisedly. I'm going to say this for him, yeah? And that's the only way the ring comes back, that she will take the ring, yeah? And you shall be a surety. So is Antonio going to be a frequent visitor there? What is that Antonio-Bassanio relationship?
Yes.
And in one of the most recent productions I saw, Portia was left recognizing that the marriage she thought she had and that she thought she saved might not be the marriage she wanted.
Yes. But but here we are. There's
Here we
going
are.
back. Yeah.
You're looking shocked, Chris.
Well, I have not studied the play as much as the two of you have, clearly.
But it's that kind of a play.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you see, my feeling is, and this is one of the wonderful things about teaching Shakespeare over so many years, that every play, in a way, becomes that. People say, what is your favorite play? Well, it's the one I'm working on at the moment that I can find out new things about. I mean, Macbeth, which is being produced everywhere, I've got a neighbor in Stratford who is going to direct it in October in Leamington Spa, which is where you change trains to get to Stratford. Got a very thriving amateur theater. And his wife is going to be playing the gentlewoman who is watching with the doctor in the sleepwalking scene. Now, I am here to tell you that I have never sat down to think about the gentlewoman. But Glynis was over at my house. We were cutting up veggies. And I said, so you're going to be in the play? Yes, I'm doing the gentlewoman. I said, oh, so what do you think's going on there? Well, in 15 minutes, what we discovered about that scene, including the fact that the doctor, whom she's asked to come and watch, doesn't believe what she said.
Right.
He says, I've watched for 2 nights, but I don't see what you've told me about. So he is being condescending, putting her down, not believing this. By the end of the scene, he's saying, more needs she the divine than the physician. He says, keep from her all means of annoyance. In other words, get those scissors out of the bedroom. And she says, last line in the scene, good night, good doctor. So by the end of the scene, he understands what she wanted him to see, and she no longer feels disbelieved.
Right.
Did I know that? I did not know that until we talked about it this summer.
It's just the love of close analysis, and it will never let you down.
Yeah. But I mean, we always say the sleepwalking scene, and we focus on Lady M, as indeed one should, but there are two other characters in that scene.
So why do, and you mentioned when we got in touch initially that there were lots of productions of Macbeth going on right now in the UK. Why now?
Well, I got several thoughts on this. The first thought is, does a play about a ruthless, ambitious, amoral politician have any relevance in our day and age? That's one.
In more than one country.
In more than one country, perhaps. The second thing is, if people are looking to celebrate the First Folio 400th anniversary, this is the only one of the big four tragedies that is a First Folio only play. Hamlet, Othello, and Lear were all published in versions during Shakespeare's lifetime. But without the First Folio, we would not have Macbeth.
Can you talk about the First Folio and the difference between the first and the quarto or the second?
Right. About 18 of Shakespeare's plays were published during his lifetime. And this includes very early plays, not so many of the late plays. In fact, Cymbeline, Winter's Tale, and The Tempest were not published in his lifetime. Pericles, which doesn't appear until the third folio, was madly popular and went through about 5 different quartos during his lifetime. Most of the history plays came out in quarto, and that would be an individual edition published not by Shakespeare, not by the Globe, not by the King's Men or the Lord Chamberlain's Men, but by a bookseller. And my guess is that in 1606, after the Gunpowder Plot, James had been on the throne for a few years, a bookseller in London would have said to himself, play about regicide in Scotland. Former King of Scotland, now King of England. Maybe this is not a play I want to publish. Maybe
by itself.
By itself. In other words, so that didn't get done. But there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, some of the comedies, Midsummer Night's Dream, yes. As You Like It in Twelfth Night, no. Measure for Measure and All's Well, no. Tempest, no. The Tempest, which is the first play in the first folio, it's the lead-off play in the folio, the last play that we know Shakespeare wrote on his own. Without the folio, we wouldn't have it. But on the other hand, Richard II, Henry IV, 1 and 2, Henry V, the Henry VI plays, not one Henry VI, but the others, those are all published during. So I think that you might say, was there an appetite for history plays that people might have gone into? But we can't be sure. But in 1623, which is 7 years after Shakespeare is dead, his co-workers, his fellow actors, his fellow shareholders in the King's Men, Hemmings and Condell, John Hemmings, Henry Condell, brought out the First Folio. It was what I can only describe as a coffee table book. It was a big book. It had 36 plays in it, and it included everything that had been published, but also these 18 plays, Taming the Shrew, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar. So the Roman plays evidently didn't seem to attract publication. But some very popular plays were published, some weren't. And without that book, we would not have half of Shakespeare's plays.
Wow.
Is it a rare book? Yes and no. I mean, every time one comes on the market, and that's not often, but there are something like 237 copies of it still in existence. So it's not a rare book, but to Shakespeareans, it is a very important book because of the plays that it brought to us.
I think some of our audience may have seen productions of Book of Will.
The Book of Will,
which
absolutely.
have been done a couple times in the corridor and then more nationally, of course.
That's right. I saw it last fall at the James Theater and Dreamwell.
Dreamwell, yes.
Dreamdale did it. And that imagines, and I love that notion that that Burbage dies, and Hemmings and Condell realize that Burbage, who was their leading actor, that if he's gone, who will remember these plays? And they know them. And that in that play, Lauren Gunderson imagines that they put it together. One more thought about Macbeth, though. So I've got the current political situation. I've got celebration of the First Folio. But then, and I don't want to sound too sentimental about this, because in a way it goes back to the current political situation. But one of the things that I think we find so appalling about what's going on right now is that people don't take responsibility and don't seem to feel at all bad about the terrible things that they're doing. Well, Macbeth is a play about guilt.
Yes.
And about what it does to you, and about how you are destroyed by the mistakes you have made. And they're not mistakes. They're careful calculations of what you're doing. And I know of no other play that is so guilt-ridden as Macbeth. Macbeth never enjoys a moment of what he has done. He never has a moment of happiness. He is always worried. He's worried before he does the murder, and he's worried after he does the murder. And in the last act, he recognizes what he has lost. I mean, some of this is very famous. Life is tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But even before that, there are lines that just strike me as so powerful. And I am going to have to look them up because I don't want to misquote them. But he is aware of what he has done to his life. And he says, my way of life is fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf, and that which should accompany old age. Maybe I respond to this, being almost 80. And that which should accompany old age as honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, I must not look to have, but in their stead, curses, not loud, but deep, mouth honor, breath, which the poor heart would fain deny and dare not. That is a man looking at his life and saying, and what have I got? And I was just saying to Mary Mayo, who's directing this production, I think Macbeth is the only figure I know in Shakespeare who is dead before he's killed. I think he's emotionally dead. And yet, there's one moment he sees Macduff, and he says, get thee back. My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already. So there's guilt, but there's that one moment where he says, I'm going to stop the killing. Yeah. And it's the first time we've heard him admit what we know he did to Lady Macduff and the kids. My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already. And Macduff calls him a coward. Uh-huh. And that's what you can't call Macbeth, because that is to be unmanly. And Lady Macbeth pulled that on him earlier.
And there's nowhere to go but through it.
And there's nowhere to go. Lay on, Macduff.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you agree with the idea that Macbeth is the most recognizable or relatable of the tragic character, of the great tragic characters?
I don't know that I'd put it that way, because it seems to me at different points in your life it might be. I think, in many ways, I think Othello is. Because he makes such a terrible mistake, but he makes it out of a kind of radical insecurity. I think all the issues it raises about race, and by the time Othello is saying that my face is my visage is now as black, that he's imbibed all of those lies of Iago. So when I'm teaching, I think a play like Othello speaks to people's worries, their sexual jealousy, their insecurity, and so forth. I think Hamlet speaks to younger people. I think Lear speaks to older people. Yeah. And I still remember one of the first times I was doing senior college on just a single play, and it was King Lear. And we're talking about the opening scene of King Lear, and my undergraduates say, "Oh, he's so old, he's senile, and so forth. Why is he dividing up the kingdom and saying, 'How much do you love me?'" Well, senior college, I get a grandmother saying, "Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? He's facing the empty nest syndrome. What is it like when your youngest child, the one you love most, is going to go off and get married?" Well, once she said that, this is not about a senile person. This is about an older person looking at being alone. Yeah. And I think...
And irrelevant.
and irrelevant, and she's going to marry a Frenchman. Hey, how much? So she's going to leave the country. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to bribe her. Yeah. And probably the part of the country he's going to give her, the third of the kingdom, is going to be the southern third, because that's where London is. That's where the county of Kent is, right across the channel from France. So even if she marries either Burgundy or the King of France, all she has to do is nip back over the channel, and she'll have to come back and see how things are going, right? So I guess what I would say, that depending on what's happening in your life, and I'll give you one more example of that, and that was the spring of 22, and I was teaching Henry V, and the invasion of Ukraine came up about 2 weeks before I was going to start teaching this play. And somebody wrote to me as we were starting, because I asked people to turn in questions, and says, why is Henry planning to invade France? And I have taught that play pretty much every year. And I started thinking, yes, and why is Putin invading Ukraine? And that whole long speech Putin gave about how Ukraine is really part of Russia, so forth. Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury has a long speech about how it's perfectly okay in, the Salic law, et cetera, et cetera. And moment after moment, I had 5 weeks of doing that play, and there is not a single act in which Shakespeare does not raise the question of responsibility, of decision, of what happens when you go to war, of the kind of threats you make to people, of Henry saying, every subject's duty is the king, but every subject's soul is his own. The king isn't responsible for the people who die in battle. Excuse me, who brought them there? And in the last scene of the play, which is supposed to be, Henry's going to marry Catherine, Burgundy gives a whole long speech about what has happened to France as a result of the war. I have never been quite so emotionally devastated, and I did not expect it to be because of Henry V.
It's impossible to ignore the parallels.
But when you are reading that while Ukraine is going on, and the beginning of that, and you are getting wonderful comments on the chat from all the senior college people, Chris, these are people who know, because they're grown-ups, they know what they're talking about, and they are seeing parallel after parallel. And I think, isn't it appalling that this play is so relevant? And aren't we privileged that we've got this play to teach and to talk about these issues?
When I've taught Shakespeare in the past, I love to show the Olivier Henry V and the Brana Henry V back to back.
Absolutely.
Because it's the same text, but with a completely different idea about what war is supposed to be.
Exactly. But even though I totally agree with you on that, Olivier does include that whole speech from Burgundy, and the camera pans over. Yes, it's a picturesque landscape, but it's a picturesque, devastated landscape. So even though Olivier leaves out some of the really ugly moments, that he does not skimp on that speech. And when I was, doing film clips to show to my class, I realized Olivier does not leave that out. So you cannot escape what that war has done to France.
Do you believe that Macbeth has a choice?
Yes, I think he does. Because he says, we will proceed no further in this business. That is, he thinks about it, if we're done when 'tis done, blah, 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 and he imagines, the angels and so forth. And Lady Macbeth comes in, and he says to her, we will proceed no further in this business. So and that's what I mean, he has talked himself out of it, and then she helps to talk him back into it.
If he'd never met the Fates, the
witches,
but essentially the Fates,
right?
Would the same play have happened?
Yes, because he says, and see, I don't call them the Fates. He says, in that scene where he meets them, if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. If this were really fated, I wouldn't have to do anything. So he knows he doesn't have to kill Duncan. But then, in the very next scene, after he's met the witches and so forth, then he and Banquo arrive. Duncan greets them, and he says how wonderful you are and so forth. And you can just see Macbeth waiting for the next line, which is, and therefore, because you have saved our kingdom from that awful Thane of Cawdor, and et cetera, you will follow me. Because the Scottish monarchy was not an inherited one. You got to sort of name who was going to be it. And instead, he says, and now I'm going to name my oldest Malcolm as the Prince of Cumberland, which is like being the Prince of Wales. Oh. And the next thing that Macbeth says is, the Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else leap, for in my way it lies. So he knows he doesn't have to do anything. And then Duncan says, and the person who will succeed me will be Prince of Cumberland. And it's like it wakes up what he calls, let not light see my black and deep desires. So there's something in him that wants that power, but he's not forced into it. And he
he's
knows
not just
he's
waiting
not.
around for the fates to give it to him either.
Then he decides, I'm going to have to do something, because if it's going to be Malcolm, hey, young man and so forth. And so he goes ahead and does it. And what does he find out? Well, excuse me, but they said Banquo would inherit. And Banquo's got a son. So now I got to get rid of Banquo and Fleance. So the logic to him is inescapable. But I think he's got a choice. And the question is, how real is that choice to him when part of him wants to be king and when his wife is saying, and if you don't go ahead, you're not a man.
Yes.
So there's pressure. I certainly would say there's pressure. But I think he's got to have a choice. And that's true, I would say, of everybody, of all of Shakespeare's major tragic figures. The one who comes closest, in a way, to not having a choice is Hamlet. Hamlet does not create the situation. He didn't kill his father. He didn't set up the marriage of his mother. That is Claudius.
Yes.
Right. And Hamlet doesn't call for the ghost. The ghost appears to Hamlet. But Hamlet does choose to listen to the ghost, although, my gosh, he doesn't move on it very quickly, does he? And in fact, he doesn't really do anything, except stab Polonius, until it's utterly clear before everybody, in the last few moments of the play, what Claudius has done.
Well, he's not ready. He cannot be ready.
No.
He has to face death.
Right.
He has to understand that we all come to this end.
Right.
Yeah.
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 But unlike Lear and unlike Othello and unlike Macbeth and unlike Antony, and I would say even unlike Coriolanus and Brutus, these are men who all do something to set up the trap that is going to kill them. Hamlet, I'm not sure, is like that. And I think that's one of the reasons that he is, so sympathetic a character to so many people, is because he hasn't made a crucial error of judgment.
Well, this could be 3 more hours.
Yeah.
And I'm neck deep in it. I think the.
But you're working on Hamlet.
Yeah, I think the line in Hamlet that sets that, and it's a short one.
Yeah.
It's the interim's mine.
Right.
That's what I think it's about.
Okay.
Because he's been given this task that he is utterly unsuited for.
Okay.
That may in fact send him to hell. It puts his soul in jeopardy, and what father would do that? He is faced with unbelievable paradoxes,
Right.
Paradoxes of Catholicism and Protestantism, and Catholicism can't possibly be real, but here is my father who's come from purgatory. What does that mean? And I think it sends his world into chaos. I think the decision he finally arrives at is, yes, the ground will have me.
Yeah.
But my life is mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. This summer, I saw a play called The Motive and the Cue, which is about John Gielgud directing Richard Burton in Hamlet, 1964. And one of the things that happens, and I don't think I've ever read this in a scholarly article, and I really want to follow up on this, is Gielgud, or Burton, essentially has the story that he saw Gielgud as a young man and that his father took him to see Gielgud. And so he's always admired Gielgud. After a really appalling scene in which Burton shows up drunk at rehearsal and mocks Gielgud and imitates him and so forth, Gielgud then goes and is invited to have breakfast with Elizabeth Taylor. And she tells him, who was there at the time, she tells him that story is not true, that his father, who was a miner, for heaven's sakes, in Wales, was a drunk and was a bully, and that this whole thing about seeing Gielgud did not happen till later, after he met Philip Burton. And so that Burton's story about his father is just not real. So there's another scene with Gielgud and Burton, and Gielgud, armed with this knowledge, finally gets Burton to talk about his father and brings up the truth, and then says, do you think Hamlet really loved his father? And Burton looks at him, and then Gielgud says, so talk to me as Hamlet about that. And Burton then speaks to be or not to be, and all those doubts reflect that chaos about his father. And I've never looked at this before as, does Hamlet really love his father? How well did he know his father? Is there resentment for what his father is trying to make him do, as you've said? But it was a fascinating moment. And so the contrast between that and what we'd seen at the end of the first act, when when Burton is behaving so appallingly. But here you have this moment of the two men actually connecting with each other. And it was fascinating.
Huh.
All right. We got to wrap up.
I know.
I have one final question for you, which is, which of Shakespeare's plays would you love to see produced here?
Meaning here in Iowa City.
Iowa City, or let's say the Eastern Corridor.
Gosh, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, because I can go for any of them.
And please know that we're speaking as producers now. We just want to know.
Oh,
yeah.
Just want to know. Well, I would love to see a production of Measure for Measure. Because I think this is a play which, like Merchant of Venice, raises a lot of questions. I think it speaks to a lot of issues. It doesn't get done that often. I think it's a deeply serious play, but also a deeply relevant one. So at the moment, I'd be interested in something like that, because I think there would be an audience for it. And I think it would speak to issues that so many people have. And it also has just got some great roles.
Yes.
You know, the Duke and Angelo and Isabella and Claudio even, and then some of those comic figures. I mean, Pompey and Porson and stuff like that. But right off the top of my head, maybe it's because I'm looking online to see if I can find a production of Measure for Measure that I can use for a Zoom discussion, but that's the one that comes to me, just because I think it's a play that gets overlooked, because I don't think it gets taught as much, and I think it's a fascinating play.
Absolutely.
Interesting. I don't know if you saw the movie The Dames.
No.
Tell
me about this.
It's Maggie Smith.
Oh, yes, I
and
have.
Joan Plowright. Yes, where they
And Eileen
or
Atkins.
Lunch with the Dames, or
Lunch with the Dames.
Tea with the Dames.
Tea with the Dames. That's it.
Yeah,
Yes, excuse
Judi
me.
Dench, Eileen Atkins, Joan Plowright, and Maggie Smith. Right,
Yeah.
out at Joan Plowright's.
Out of Joan Plowright's
Right.
place. Yes. It's her vision was already at that point.
Right.
Yes, fading a lot. But they talked a lot about Measure for Measure,
I didn't remember that.
and about as it being something they all still had in their head, as being, you know, and they of course famously talked about feeling unable to play Cleopatra because they didn't feel beautiful enough, these four women, to play Cleopatra. But it was the one that was most surprising to me was they're talking about Measure for Measure, and it may have been more in the outtakes, but that when asked what Shakespeare do you hold in your head,
Right.
and they said, I hold all of Measure for Measure. I have good chunks of this and that and the
Right.
other thing. Yeah.
Well, since you mentioned Antony and Cleopatra, I mean, that is, you know, it's the great role for a woman, And I think it is an absolutely fascinating play. It's really tough to do, though.
Yeah.
It's very, very tough. And but I do have the advantage of having seen Helen Mirren do it.
Oh.
And I have never recovered from that one either.
Well, if you're just going to name drop,
Yeah.
we'll never top you.
We'll never catch up.
No, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, there's something about that play. And again, the problems that it leaves you with, because on the one hand, you see all the mistakes
Yeah.
that Antony and Cleopatra are making. And on the other hand, do we really want this to be a world run by Octavius Caesar?
Right.
And the answer is we don't.
No.
And he's going to come in and he's going to clean up and he's going to use them. And he's going to show them off in a monument, and this is going to show how wonderful he is and how tolerant he is. And it's all going to redound to the greater glory of Octavius Caesar. And we're into the Augustan age, and I mean, we all know about that.
Yeah.
You know, and Shakespeare has got that way of they're gone, they're dead. But those are the, the people who are left alive are never as big as the ones who are dead.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Edgar says.
Yes.
Yes.
We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long.
All right.
Good place to be. Thank you so much for your
Oh,
time
we so
today and your
appreciate
wisdom.
that you took the time. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, thank you so much to Miriam Gilbert for her time and expertise. That's a lot to chew on and think about and be inspired by. And I can't wait to see these productions this fall.
Yes, I'm very excited.
So a reminder, in order of their appearance in our area, Willow Creek Theater is having their production going on this weekend. The tickets are at willowcreektheaterre.org. Next up in September is Mount Vernon Lisbon Community Theater. Their tickets are available at mvlct.com. Then at the beginning of October, University of Iowa has 2 weekends of Macbeth. I would suggest Googling University of Iowa Theater Macbeth to take you right to their page. Their website can get a little convoluted. In the second weekend of their run is when Dreamwell is doing The Weird Sisters. They're at dreamwell.com or at thejamesic.com. thejamesic.com for tickets. And finally, in the beginning of November, a single performance of Macbeth at Cornell Theater, again suggesting that you look Cornell College Theater, you Google those words, and then follow the links for tickets. Usually at Cornell, you can come to the production and buy tickets at the door.
Chris, you did that whole thing off book.
I did my research.
That was very impressive. I'm very impressed. All right. Well, thank you very much for staying with us and sticking with us. Our next episode, exciting episode.
Exciting.
We will be talking about Iowa City Community Theater's production of Our Town, which is a play that we have both done and we both love, and we're very excited to talk about it.
We will be discussing some of the history of this classic American play and also specific information about this coming production.
Thank you for sticking with us. Again, we would love to hear your comments. Comments about the episode we just did, comments about episodes we should do, people we should talk to. If we've gotten information wrong, please let us know.
Yes, we are ever on the path towards self-improvement.
Yes, and again, please help us find a name. Because really, as of episode 3, if we haven't found a name, it's really on you if it hasn't happened. So we're all in this together, I feel.
Thank you so much for joining us for Voices from the Crowd, a Crooked Path Theater Guide to Eastern Iowa Theater. Oh heavens!
The name needs to change when even we can't say it.
So sorry.
Thank you all
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.